So Ted, as you walk through the museum today, describe what you were feeling as you peruse the history of the game.
You think about all of the baseball history that you've focused upon in your lifetime, and there are, bits and pieces of it scattered all in and around your brain. And various times in your life oh, I remember that, and think about that. But in here, it's like one massive shotgun blast of history. And those pieces that are in your head reminding you of what you know and remember and think about historically. It's all thrust upon you in one massive kaleidoscope at once. And you're looking here and there's Gehrig, and you're looking there as Christy Mathewson, and you look over there as Mantle, and it's just everywhere at once. And very difficult to separate because it's literally thrown all at once. And all those bits and pieces that are segmented in various places in your brain, they all immediately thrust themselves into each other at once. It's like, atoms, bumping into atoms. It's just bouncing off everything that you've ever thought about or remembered in your life as it relates to baseball.
Do you find yourself sort of in awe of the fact that you played this game while looking at this history?
It's very difficult to explain how I feel being a new electee, because the likelihood of that is so remote. No matter how good you are or how long you've been, focused upon and, praised for whatever you've been able to do throughout your life athletically, it's really difficult to sort all that out and explain, well, how I feel about that. It's humbling to say the very least, but maybe humbling to say the very most, because I'm searching for words of description, and the humility is such that you keep saying to yourself as a real kind of live person, you don't really deserve this, or you don't really feel like you're part of this, do you? And you're asking yourself that question, or I'm asking myself that question, not because I feel necessarily I don't belong, but more that should anyone belong? With these names and these faces and this history, how do you end up rationalizing your place in it all when it's really more like an eye blink than it is a focus on? Because it seems just so quick and over, and how could have anybody noticed that I blinked my eyes?
Fascinating. So, the youngest of 4 children, growing up in Michigan, you were born with natural athletic talent, it seems. When you were growing up amidst your siblings in Michigan, who had the greatest influence on you as an athlete?
My 2 older brothers had the biggest influence. They recognized that something was going on extraordinarily as it related to me, because my nearest brother was 7 years older than myself. My older brother was 14 years older than myself. So they were kind of watching and overseeing my progress all along the way, whether it was playing in baseball or basketball or football. They were both athletes themselves, and when I showed up and was, doing things with this, quote, bilateral symmetry at a very young and early age, they knew something was up. And so they more or less fed my craving for that kind of athletic participation. It didn't matter to me. I could play basketball, I could play football, play baseball, and loved all of it. I mean, I just shifted as the weather changed. You know, at that time, that's what the athletes did. They played all the sports and, you know, extracted the benefit from them all as opposed to just one single focus, which is often the case today. But my two older brothers had the most influence on me athletically. They made it happen for me.
So in high school, you were talking about playing all these different sports. You excelled in baseball and basketball and football. You received football scholarship offers from big-time football programs like Ohio State, Michigan State, amongst others. But you chose baseball. Was it because the Cardinals made you their first-round draft pick, or was there something else about the game that said, that's what I want to do?
I knew by the time I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. And people around me knew that my focus was on the baseball. Although I had, as you say, opportunities to play football intercollegiately and basketball at big, you know, Division, you know, I universities. And I loved those sports, but I knew I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player all along. And when I was drafted by the Cardinals in that first round, I got it. This is what I'm after. This is what I want to do. And I intended fully to go to college, no matter what, whether it was collegiately through their scholarship program, or if I was drafted high enough, have the leverage to negotiate the collegiate portion of those scholarships. I knew I was going to college, and I knew I was going to Michigan. If I didn't sign, that was a given in the same way that if I were drafted high enough and the opportunity presented itself, I wanted to play baseball, you know, and would choose every time over football, over basketball. I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player, and I knew that by the time I was 10.
So when we talked to you in San Diego after the Modern Era Committee elected you, you told the story about taking batting practice at Tiger Stadium with the Major League Club as a teenager. How did that come about, and what do you recall of that experience?
Well, it's a portion of my life I will never forget because it was such an unusual thing. Certainly for something like that to happen today, it would be precluded today. You just couldn't do it. But the scout at that time in the Detroit area was a man by the name of Lou D'Annunzio. And Al Catalantis was the farm director. Jim Campbell, I'm almost certain, was still the Tiger general manager, but Catalantis was the farm director, and the scout was Louis D'Annunzio. And they arranged that when the Tigers were in town on the weekends, if I wanted to come down and take batting practice and infield with these guys and go to the game those 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, I was welcome to do that. Naturally, they wanted me to do it because they could see and evaluate my skill set right in front of, you know, their eyes. And back then, it was done. I ended up doing the same thing with the Baltimore Orioles when they came one weekend. So it was a common practice back then that that sort of thing would happen. But when I got dressed, I went down through the tunnel and out there dugout steps and onto the, you know, Briggs Stadium field. And there were all the guys. I mean, there they were. And we took BP, and I hit in the last group. And after the last group was over, I took infield with him. Free hand, sitting right there, man. Okay, you're up. Let's go. It was like the most incredible thing. I mean, it was doing absolutely horrible things to my, you know, ego and, you know, sense of self-worth. It was like soaring insanely. Because at 14 years old, I'm down taking BP with the Tigers. Give me a break. I mean, yeah, oh yeah, I saw like a freehand, like we were throwing infield, and we warmed up together before infield. And my friends are going, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." I said, "No, this is what's happening."
So you show up at the Cardinals rookie camp in '67, July of '67, after signing. This is right after your high school graduation. That has to be another part of that whole ego thing. That has to do something to you as a 17-year-old. What was that experience like, being that 17-year-old? All of a sudden, you're a professional ball player.
Well, I mean, and had just been paid an enormous amount of money at that time, and my education guaranteed. It was, you know, incredible in terms of my family and the economics. You know, I thought it was bigger than life. I actually thought I was bigger than life. And everything I had done athletically up until that time convinced me I was bigger than life. Okay, and you know, I just thought I was like bigger than life. And when I went down there the first time, they had a guy by the name of George Kissel, who many people know and remember in the Cardinal organization, and he made it real clear. First day, we all got down there, we'd all just been drafted, and he had a big chalkboard. And on the chalkboard, he had the X's and O's, all the outfielders and infielders, pitcher and catcher, in the designated spots with a drawn Major League field type. And then he had runners on first and third. And he proceeds to say, now there's a pop-up hit down on the right field line. And everybody's chasing it. And after the second baseman gets to that ball and catches it, I want to know where everybody goes. Okay? Pure, flat out, one of the most complex, you know, cutoff and relay formats you could put up. And so he said, anybody want to stand up and tell me where everybody goes? Of course, we're all 17, 18 years old. Nobody's going to stand up and say a word. And nobody did. Until finally, George turned to me and he said, Mr. Simmons, I'm sure you know where everybody goes. Would you stand up, please, and come up here and explain to everybody in here where all the fielders go on this pop-up down the right field line with runners in first and third? Where does everybody go? And I stand up in front of everybody and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Kissel, I haven't any idea. He said, well, then you sit down, Mr. Simmons. Okay? And sure enough, he draws up another design, bases loaded, down the left field line. Okay, I'm sure somebody wants to know, and stand up and say where everybody goes. And I'm sitting, he's waiting, and I say, oh God, please don't let this happen. And George said, Mr. Simmons, you stand up again. And he said, I'm sure, Mr. Simmons, that you know exactly where to go. With this being the bases loaded instead of first and third down the left field line, you know exactly where everybody goes, right? And I said, oh my God, no. I said, I'm sorry, Mr. Kissel. I don't know. He said, well, then you sit back down. I did. After the day is over, he has his son, who was acting as the clubhouse guy, Dick Kissel, doctor in Springfield, Missouri today, he sends him out and says, hey, my dad wants to see you in his office. Go in there. So, oh, God. So I stroll into his office. Okay, I sit down, and I no telling what he's going to say. He says, Mr. Simmons, you know why I called you out the way I did today, don't you? And I said, I really don't, Mr. Kissel. I have no idea. He says, I wanted you to see that just because you were drafted #1 and got all the money and an education paid for at that big school up there in Ann Arbor you're so proud of, okay? He says, you weren't any more suited to be in here than any of the rest of them that didn't know anything. He said, but I thought you needed to know that. And I said, I see. You understand why I did that, Mr. Simmons? And I said, I do, Mr. Kissel. He said, okay. And he sent me off. And that was my first my first professional baseball memorable experience as the #1 pick with all the education paid for and all the bonus contract up front. And George made it real clear where I stood in that clubhouse. And I'm glad as I could possibly be that that was my introduction. I couldn't have been happier in retrospect. At the time, I thought I was going to die. Absolutely thought I was.
But it set the tone.
It did. It told me, you only think you're bigger than life. You're not bigger than life.
You know, obviously, you know, I had a question here about George Kissel and what he meant to you. I think, to some degree, that may be the greatest lesson he taught you.
It was the greatest lesson that he taught me. It was my first taste of humility. You might hear that again before you get done with me someday. But it was my first taste of humility. And when I said I went down there thinking I was bigger than life, everything I had done up until that time athletically told me that I was, which wasn't the best thing for my ego. But George took care of that. And it didn't take very long.
So you played a couple of games with the big league club in '68 and again in '69 when the Cardinals' main catcher was Tim McCarver. How much of an influence did McCarver have on you as a young catcher, and what do you recall of that first time working with him?
McCarver was great for me because he embraced me. Timmy was still, I mean, he'd always been a really bright guy, and sense of awareness, and I mean, knows what's happening all the time. And what he knew about what was happening then was that I had come through the minors after 2.5 years doing everything, and he realized that a transition was imminent. And he embraced that in a way that enhanced my ability to be around. I mean, as I say, I came up as barely 20 years old in that September, and the closest guy to me was Carlton, who was 27 years old. Everybody else had played on the '67 and '68 championship teams the Cardinals had at that time, and they were all in the 30s. Carlton was the nearest me at 27. I mean, you talk about, you know, duck out of water. And so Timmy knew what was up, and he embraced me.
Except for the recently inducted Ivan Rodriguez, you have the most hits of any catcher in the Hall of Fame. But you're also a power hitter, but as a power hitter, you struck out less than 50 times a season on average throughout your entire career. What allowed you to make such good contact?
The single most advantageous thing offensively that any hitter can possess is exactly what enabled me to do that, and that is switch hit. I've thought about switch hitting and analyzed it my entire life, and been through the whole 9 yards of it, from the physical aspects and all of it, the mental aspects, dominance and non-dominance. But that's a long discussion. The short version is the switch hitter offensively is in a position to always control the platoon effect. And depending on which sabermetrics guy or analytics guy you're talking to, somewhere between 40 and 40 plus basis points on every batting average there is. So if, in theory, with the platoon effect, in your lap every at bat, a 250 hitter, okay,
is 290, 300.
And so it's what enables you to stay in on the breaking ball, left or right-handed, it doesn't matter. The breaking ball, with the platoon effect from the hitter's perspective, always sees the breaking ball coming to him, okay? Conversely, without the platoon effect, the baseball or breaking ball starts at your head and forces you to bail and ends up over there, which ultimately can still be a strike. From here, you can see and gauge the full 60 feet 6 inches as to whether or not the pitch is going to be a strike. Without the platoon effect, you don't know if this is going to hit you in the head or between the eyes or in the side or back until it gets out there. And it's why 40 plus basis points is built into a switch hitter. And it's why, if I decide you're not going to strike me out, you don't have anything to strike me out with, unless you're 99 plus. If you're mid-range or below, you're going to have to pay.
You're making contact.
Yeah. So it's directly related. It is the answer to your question.
So we've heard from teammates, coaches, managers, people that have played with you and against you. They talk about your obsessive drive to improve as a player in all aspects of your game. What was it that motivated you?
What was it what?
What was it that motivated you?
The fact that when I first came, I didn't belong. I came because Shannon got sick. I was barely 20 years old and out over my skis. And defensively, primarily, it wouldn't have taken me too long, and I got the feel for the hitting, which I did anyway, okay? But defensively, I was catching Bob Gibson at 20 years old, Steve Carlton at 20 years old, and wasn't suited for that. Was too young. Hadn't caught enough, certainly not at upper levels. I'd spent a year and a half at AAA, but not because I was the best defensive catcher in the organization, but because I was the best hitter in the organization. And they wanted that in St. Louis, but it was forced anyway, timing-wise, because of Shannon, who became ill. Torrey had just been obtained from Atlanta. He was going to catch. Shannon was going to play third base. Shannon got sick. Torrey went to third, and they said, ready or not, Simmons, you're coming. And so my obsession with getting better was first and foremost necessary, demanded, and finally, after realizing how important it was, I finally, when I say finally, I didn't have much time to come to this conclusion, but I realized that a catcher at the major league level must commit himself defensively first, because if he doesn't, nobody will want to pitch to him. I wouldn't want to pitch to me if I wasn't committed defensively. And so this was instructed and insisted upon by Red and the people, Boyer and the people around. We love your bat. You're going to play in the majors a long time. But if you're not going to commit yourself defensively, you can't remain at this position. Your bat will probably carry you. If you want to be a catcher, you're going to have to get on the truck. And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to be as good as I can be and convince everybody that I'm the guy they want to catch, whether I get any hits or I don't. And when you're that young, your focus is, how do I stay? How do I stay? How do I stay? And when they say, well, you're not going to stay unless you commit yourself defensively to these guys, or you're not going to stay. Got it. Let me write that down. Put that where it belongs and not forget that.
So you mentioned Bob Gibson, 71, your second year catching. You catch his no-hitter.
Yeah.
What do you recall of that?
Yeah.
And at what point in that game did you realize that something special was happening?
Well, it always happens about the same time, because you've got the guy in your lap and you see what he's doing. In other words, his stuff tonight is even more extraordinary than it usually is. And around the fourth, fifth, and certainly by the sixth, usually somewhere in the fifth and sixth inning, you realize something special tonight, and it could happen, a no-hitter. And so I was really just following along, because Gibson was the guy, and he knew what he was going to do, and he only threw 2 pitches. Hard gas, hard slider. And there was, I mean, that's all there was coming. And they still couldn't hit him. Nobody could. I mean, you think 1.12, you know, for a full season of ERA, for an all-time record? I mean, forget about it. So, I mean, what I recall of that night is just an extraordinary pitcher, and about the 5th or 6th inning realized that this could happen tonight. And what was extraordinary about that for me is even I, at that young age, I knew what Stargell, you know, Parker, Sanguian, Oliver, they had a bunch over there that just mashed the ball everywhere. Rennie Stannett, Hebner, you know, they had just a monster offensive club. And here he's on the verge of no-hitting these guys. That was extraordinary. And I remember most about that. This club, I mean, if Gibson only had 1 no-hitter, the last club at that time I would have expected it to have happened against was the Pittsburgh Pirates. They'd have been the last club he'd have no-hit. On that night, he might have, well, he'd have no-hit anybody. or could have. Extraordinary pitcher.
All right, last question. So we're sitting here in the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum's Plaque Gallery. Just a few months, you're going to be cast in bronze. You're going to be hanging on the wall right over there, a mere few feet from Babe Ruth and Ted Williams, and you're going to join Stan Musial and Red Schoendienst, catching legends like Johnny Bench and Yogi Berra and Carlton Fisk. You know, it goes on and on. You're forever going to be referred to as Hall of Famer Ted Simmons. Is that overwhelming? Is it ultimately satisfying? Is it a combination of all those things?
For me, what it is, it's confirmation. Regardless of how I feel about my own career or others feel about it, is really of no consequence at this point. The 2020 Modern Era Election Committee deemed me credible. And in that context, I'm all good.
You're more than credible.
I'm just saying. It's how I see it. You know? It's how I see it. This place is a big place. You start getting focused a little too inward around here, you better back up. You better back it up, pal. Better start backing it up. Yeah, it's like I say, well, you got it. You got it.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Yeah.